I used to think the most annoying thing about living in a quiet suburban neighborhood was the leaf blowers at 7 in the morning. Then my neighbor Kyle decided my driveway was basically community property, and somehow his son Dylan treated it like a VIP parking pass every single afternoon. And the crazy part is, this whole thing could have ended with one simple apology, one normal conversation between adults, but instead it spiraled into tow trucks, city inspectors, code violations, and a bill so expensive I genuinely think Kyle avoids eye contact with his own mailbox now. See, I've lived in this house outside Raleigh for almost 12 years. Same little brick ranch house, same white fence, same driveway. I paid to have resurfaced myself after an ugly winter cracked the old concrete, clean down the middle. I take care of my property, not in some obsessive HOA dictator kind of way. I'm not measuring grass with a ruler or reporting garbage cans to the neighborhood Facebook group. But I do believe if something belongs to somebody, you respect it. Pretty basic concept, right? Apparently not for Kyle. Kyle was one of those guys who always acted like rules were optional if he smiled while breaking them. Loud pickup truck, wraparound sunglasses even when it was cloudy, permanently holding a beer anytime the temperature went above 60 degrees. The kind of neighbor who'd wave at you with 2 fingers while actively making your life harder. And his son Dylan was somehow even worse. Mid-20s, backward baseball cap, giant black truck with tires that looked like they belonged on military equipment, always blasting country rap through speakers that rattled windows 3 houses down. The first time Dylan blocked my driveway, I honestly thought it was an accident. I came home around lunchtime because a meeting got canceled, turned into my street, and there it was, this giant black Silverado sitting sideways across the lower half of my driveway, like somebody had abandoned it during an evacuation. I just sat there blinking for a second thinking, no way, no actual adult parks like this unless there's an emergency. So I waited. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Finally Dylan came jogging out of Kyle's garage carrying a bag of fast food, looked directly at me sitting in my car, and instead of apologizing, he actually laughed. Like genuinely laughed. He goes, "Relax, man. I was only inside for a minute." A minute. Meanwhile, I'd been trapped in the street long enough to finish half a podcast episode and reconsider several life choices. But I kept it polite. I told him, "Hey, I need you to stop blocking the driveway going forward, all right?" He nodded in that fake, dismissive way people do when they already know they're ignoring you before the conversation even ends. Then he drove off. 2 days later, same truck, same spot. That's when I walked over to Kyle's house. Now here's the thing. I wasn't angry yet. Frustrated, sure, but still trying to handle it like an adult. I knocked on the door, explained the situation calmly, even joked a little trying to keep it friendly. And Kyle just leaned against the door frame sipping a beer with this smug little grin that immediately told me exactly what kind of person I was dealing with. He said, "Come on, man, Dylan's not hurting anything. You're being a little dramatic about a driveway." That sentence changed everything. Because it wasn't about parking anymore. It was about disrespect. It was about one guy deciding his convenience mattered more than somebody else's property. And honestly, I think Kyle enjoyed testing boundaries because nobody in the neighborhood ever pushed back on him. People complained about him constantly, but always quietly, always behind closed doors. Nobody wanted conflict. But I grew up with a father who used to say something that stuck with me forever. The moment people learn there are no consequences, they stop pretending to care. And standing there looking at Kyle, smirking at me from behind his screen door, I realized he genuinely believed there would never be consequences. That was his first mistake. Now let me pause the story for a second, because this is where a lot of people make the wrong move emotionally. They think situations like this are about parking, or noise, or property lines. But honestly, most neighborhood conflicts are really about social dominance. This is a psychological trap people fall into all the time. Kyle wasn't blocking my driveway because he desperately needed those extra 15 feet of concrete. The street had open parking literally 10 yards away. What he was really doing was testing whether anybody would challenge him. And once somebody gets away with a small violation repeatedly, their brain starts reclassifying your boundaries as optional. That's why these situations almost always escalate if nobody pushes back early. One ignored offense turns into entitlement shockingly fast. From a legal perspective, though, this was actually incredibly simple. A lot of people assume you can't tow a vehicle unless there's a giant warning sign or some dramatic confrontation first. But according to standard procedure in most U.S. municipalities, blocking access to a private residential driveway is considered an immediate obstruction issue. Translation: if somebody prevents you from entering or leaving your own property, that vehicle can usually be removed without prior notice, especially if the homeowner can prove repeated violations. And honestly, this is where people get themselves in trouble emotionally. They confuse politeness with immunity. Kyle thought that because I had been patient, I would stay patient forever. He mistook calmness for weakness, and Dylan followed his lead because kids, even grown adult kids, usually mirror the confidence of their parents. If Kyle had simply told his son, "Hey, stop parking there," this entire story ends in 30 seconds. But instead, they doubled down. And the lesson here is, once somebody openly dismisses a reasonable boundary to your face, they're usually betting that you care more about avoiding conflict than enforcing consequences. That bet was about to get very expensive. After that conversation with Kyle, I stopped reacting emotionally and started thinking strategically, because once somebody shows you they don't respect a polite warning, there's really no value in giving the same speech over and over hoping they magically become considerate people overnight. That's not how people work. So the next morning before work, I called the city's non-emergency line. And let me tell you something. The woman on the phone sounded like she had dealt with this exact issue about 8,000 times already. I explained the situation, gave her my address, asked whether somebody blocking my driveway could legally be towed without notice. She didn't even hesitate. "Absolutely," she said. "If the vehicle obstructs access to private property, you can contact a licensed tow provider immediately." That was it. No courtroom drama. No 3-day warning period. No HOA committee meeting under fluorescent lighting while retired people argued about mailbox colors. Simple. So I wrote down the municipal code number, saved screenshots on my phone, and then, this was my favorite part, I called a local tow company just to ask about response times. Guy told me they usually handled residential calls within 20 to 30 minutes, depending on traffic. I saved the number under a contact labeled driveway. Not tow company. Driveway. Because at that point, I already knew exactly where this story was headed. The funny thing is, once you stop arguing with difficult people and quietly prepare instead, they usually have no idea what's coming. Kyle kept waving at me across the yard like we were buddies. Dylan kept showing up in that obnoxious truck with the exhaust loud enough to trigger small earthquakes. And then Tuesday happened. I came home around noon again, turned onto my street, and there it was, black Silverado, diagonally across my driveway like the concrete personally belonged to his family bloodline. I actually laughed. Not angry laughter either. More like the kind of laugh you let out when somebody walks straight into a trap you warned them about repeatedly. I parked across the street, took 3 pictures from different angles, and called the tow company. That was it. No knocking. No discussion. No, "Hey buddy, can you move?" We were past that stage. 22 minutes later, a tow truck rolled into the neighborhood. And man, if you've never watched somebody's confidence evaporate in real time, it's honestly incredible. The driver hopped out, checked the plate, looked at the positioning, then immediately started hooking the Silverado up. No hesitation whatsoever. Like this wasn't even remotely unusual. About halfway through the process, Dylan came bursting out of Kyle's garage carrying a sports drink and a bag of chips, screaming, "Wow! Wow, what the hell?" The tow driver didn't even look at him. Just kept tightening chains. I stayed standing across the street watching quietly while Dylan started pacing circles around the truck like an NPC glitching in a video game. Then Kyle came out, and I swear this man looked personally betrayed by reality itself. He marched straight toward me across the lawn going, "Are you serious right now?" I said, "Completely." He pointed at the tow truck like I'd launched a missile into his living room. "You could have knocked on the damn door." And this right here was the moment everything shifted. Because suddenly the guy who spent weeks dismissing me wanted communication. Suddenly courtesy mattered. Suddenly neighborly respect was important. Funny how that works. I looked him dead in the face and said, "I did knock. Twice." Silence. Actual silence. Kyle just stood there staring at me because deep down he knew I was right. There was nothing he could argue. No misunderstanding. No confusion. They had simply assumed there would never be consequences. Then Dylan goes, "Dad, they're taking the truck." And the tow driver, absolute legend, casually says, "Impound address is on the paperwork." I almost lost it trying not to laugh. The release fee ended up being around $300 after storage and administrative charges got added in, which honestly should have been enough for normal people to learn a lesson. But pride does weird things to people. For about 2 weeks, everything was peaceful. Dylan parked on the street. Kyle avoided me completely. I figured we were done. Then one Friday afternoon, I walked outside to leave for the grocery store and nearly stopped in disbelief. The Silverado was back. Except this time, it wasn't partially blocking the driveway. It was fully blocking it. Like aggressively blocking it. I couldn't pull out at all. And I remember just sitting in my kitchen staring through the blinds thinking, wow, they really learned absolutely nothing. But then something clicked for me. This wasn't accidental anymore. This was retaliation. Kyle was embarrassed about the first tow. Dylan was embarrassed his truck got hauled away in front of the neighborhood. And now they wanted to reassert control. That's the psychology behind a lot of these escalations. People who feel humiliated often double down instead of correcting behavior because admitting fault feels worse to them than continuing the conflict. So this time, I didn't even look outside twice. I grabbed my coffee, sat at the dining table, and made the call. Again, the same dispatcher answered. And I'm not kidding. I think she recognized my address because she literally sighed and said, "Same vehicle?" I said, "Same vehicle." She goes, "We'll send somebody." 25 minutes later, the tow truck returned like the sequel nobody asked for. Only this time was better. Because Dylan apparently didn't realize the truck was gone until the next morning. See, they'd left in Kyle's SUV that night, assuming they'd just moved the Silverado later. Except later never came because impound lots close overnight. So now the bill included overnight storage fees. When Kyle found out, the man absolutely snapped. I was outside trimming hedges when he stormed across the lawn red-faced, veins bulging out of his neck, holding paperwork in his hand like he was about to sue gravity itself. "This is harassment," he yelled. "Harassment? For towing a truck illegally blocking my driveway." I actually put the hedge trimmers down because I needed both hands free to process the stupidity of that sentence. Then he says, "You're targeting my family." And I remember replying, "Kyle, your family keeps parking on my property," which somehow only made him angrier. Now here's where things went from neighborhood drama to full-blown self-destruction. Because instead of accepting the loss and moving on, Kyle decided to challenge the tow through the city. Terrible decision. Absolutely catastrophic decision. According to standard procedure, disputing a tow triggers a documentation review, meaning city staff start examining photographs, violation history, property access issues, basically everything connected to the complaint. And during that review, somebody noticed something interesting in the attached photos. Dylan's truck wasn't just blocking my driveway. In multiple pictures, part of the rear tire was extending across the public sidewalk. Now normally, most cities won't aggressively enforce something like that unless complaints pile up. But once you invite municipal attention onto your property yourself, different story. Code enforcement showed up the following week. And suddenly Kyle's household had inspectors measuring curb clearance, documenting obstruction violations, photographing repeat offenses, checking whether vehicles interfered with pedestrian access. Neighbors started watching from windows like it was live television. One inspector even knocked on my door asking whether the obstruction issue had been ongoing for a while. I showed him timestamps, photos, previous tow receipts, everything neatly organized in a folder because by this point I was committed to professionalism out of pure spite. The citations came fast after that. One for sidewalk obstruction, another for repeated improper parking across residential access areas. Total penalties somewhere around $450 if I remember correctly. And the best part? All of it happened because Kyle challenged a completely legal tow he never should have triggered in the first place. That's the thing about arrogance. Sometimes people become so obsessed with winning, they accidentally invite scrutiny onto themselves. After the citations showed up, the entire energy changed. No more loud comments from the garage. No more smug little smirks. No more Silverado in my driveway. Dylan started parking legally on the street like every other functioning adult in America. Kyle stopped making eye contact entirely. And honestly, the silence afterward was almost unsettling because the neighborhood suddenly felt peaceful again. But every now and then I'd look at that empty driveway and think about how ridiculously avoidable the whole situation had been. One apology. 1 ounce of respect. That's literally all it would have taken. You know what's funny about situations like this? People always assume the story is about revenge. Tow trucks, tickets, city inspectors, all the dramatic stuff gets the attention. But honestly, that's not really what stayed with me afterward. What stuck with me was how incredibly small acts of disrespect can snowball once somebody decides your boundaries don't matter. Because think about it, this whole thing started with a driveway. Not money, not violence, not some massive legal war between neighbors. Just a simple request between two adults. Hey, please don't block my driveway. That's it. Normal human interaction. And somehow it escalated into thousands of dollars in penalties because one family became emotionally committed to never admitting they were wrong. That happens everywhere now. In neighborhoods, workplaces, families, HOA communities, people dig themselves into deeper and deeper holes because pride becomes more important than reality. This is a psychological trap a lot of people don't recognize in themselves. Once embarrassment enters the equation, some people stop trying to solve the problem and start trying to win the conflict instead. And usually, that's where the real damage begins. From a legal perspective, this situation was actually boringly straightforward. The law didn't suddenly become aggressive. The city didn't target anybody. According to standard procedure, repeated violations create paper trails. Paper trails create scrutiny, and scrutiny creates consequences. That's how systems work. Most people just never encounter those systems because they stop after the first warning. Kyle and Dylan didn't stop. And the lesson here is, boundaries only exist if you're willing to enforce them. Not emotionally, not aggressively, just consistently. I think that's the part a lot of viewers will probably debate in the comments. Some people are always going to say, you should have kept the peace, while other people will say I should have called the tow company the very first time. Honestly, I understand both sides. Because neighbor conflict is uncomfortable. Nobody wants tension 5 houses down from where they sleep every night. There's always that moment where you wonder if you're overreacting, if maybe it's easier to just tolerate disrespect to avoid drama. But eventually you realize something important. Every time you ignore a clear boundary violation, you quietly teach the other person that your inconvenience is acceptable. And once that lesson settles in, people rarely stop on their own. So now I'm genuinely curious. How many warnings would you have given before making the call? 1? 2? Or would you have skipped the conversation entirely and let the tow truck introduce itself first?